Please use the chat window to respond. Senior management, business owner. Lovely. Okay. How many of you are familiar with the concept of employee assistance program, and in how many of your organization you already have EAP, employee assistance program? So employee assistance program is nothing but providing counseling assistance for all your employees in your organization. For employees who are dealing with work-related stress, addiction issues, relationship issues, work-life balance, or any personal issues, or it could be something simple as stress management, motivational self-development. People who are struggling with that, they can definitely approach the counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists who are part of the employee assistance program. That is the entire purpose of employee assistance program. We are going to be talking with us today. We have Kannan Parthasarathy, who is a very senior psychologist, and Dr. Kudusa Dungarwal from Mumbai. Kannan is from Chennai, and Dr. Dungarwal is from Mumbai. Thank you, Kannan and Doctor, for joining us today and sparing your time among your busy schedule.
Thanks, Vijay.
Thank you, Vijay.
Sure. Let's get started. A quick brief about KELP HR. We specialize in creating safe and inclusive workplace. That has been our vision with which we've been working for the last 7 years. And we've been working with corporates pan-India and helping them create safe and inclusive workplace. As part of SAFE, prevention of sexual harassment, and EAP, employee assistance program, is also part of that. And as part of inclusion, diversity and inclusion is our other area that we have been specializing on. So our counselors, employees can talk to our counselors on various aspects, as I mentioned, ranging from addiction, OCD, anxiety, any suicidal thoughts. So our counselors are there to guide, and if required, they'll further guide them to a psychiatrist if required. And as part of our employee assistance program, we also do a lot of well-being workshops, ranging from mindfulness, mental well-being, emotional well-being, work-life balance, stress management. These are some of the developmental workshops that we also deal with as part of our EAP program. So some of the hygiene and thumb rules that we will follow through this session. Any questions, please use the chat window as we have more participants joining in. We'll have the first 20 minutes, which will be addressed by Dr. Kannan, and then the second 20 minutes, we'll go with questions and answers by Dr. Dungarwal. And the last 10-15 minutes, we will open it up for Q&A, wherein all your questions that you posted on the chat will be answered by our guests here. So a brief, quick background on Kannan. Kannan is a counseling psychologist. He can be reached on GoKannan Par, Kannan Parthasarathy, gokannanpar@gmail.com. So that's a brief introduction on Kannan. So he has 27 years of work experience from a corporate background. He was a vice president at Capgemini, and then he also specialized on his counseling psychology, and he's been handling various different forms of issues as part of his counseling, ranging from corporate counseling to dealing with voluntary services with Agram Foundation, and he also does career and guidance wing for the Chennai Counselors Foundation. So he's an active member of the Chennai Counselors Foundation as well, and provides various counseling to individuals, college students, to corporate employees. And he uses various different approaches in counseling. So from the eclectic approach to the modern Adlerian techniques. I'm just not familiar with all these terms. So probably I'll have Kannan to share more about all these things during his talk. Yeah?
Sure.
Yes, Kannan, let's get started. Yeah. So to start off with, what is counseling and when can employees seek counseling?
Okay. Um, am I audible? My voice is clear?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay, excellent. Hi, everyone. Okay. So coming to the basics, okay, what is counseling? Because there has been a lot of confusion regarding what is counseling. Okay. In a simple terms, if you want to say, it is more of a professional relationship with a client, a group, or an individual, or a family, which empowers them for to meet their wellness, mental health, or career or personal goals. To summarize, that's what it is. So the key point here is empowering, because there's always a confusion between counseling. Is it an advice? Counseling, is it, do they give solutions? No, counseling is not giving solutions or just advising. A counseling helps the client in understanding, creating more awareness within himself or herself, and also get an understanding about the resources that they can use, which can help them in achieving their goal. So the idea is that not providing just a solution. The idea is that it is actually developing themselves, developing the client, so that they don't become dependent on anyone later. So they can actually handle things on their own. So that's what counseling is about.
Lovely. I think finding their own solution without any dependence, but not giving advices or not giving solutions. Lovely. I think that was a wonderful answer. So when can one seek counseling?
Okay. Okay, for that, let me actually talk about the definition of what World Health Organization says about health or a mental health. When health means, it is not just absence of any diseases. It is related to physical, mental, and the social aspect. And similarly, when you talk about a mental health means when a person is able to handle the day-to-day stress on their own. When you talk about day-to-day stress, it is more of, okay, whatever is related to their, when they talk to their friends, issues can happen. So how do they handle it? When they talk to their family, within families, issues can happen. How do they handle that? And from how do they actually get their maximum productivity? So how do they understand and achieve their peak? That is from a work perspective. And beyond this, how are they efficiently contributing to their community? So all these put together is the mental health as per the definition of World Health Organization. So if you look at this, let's take this. So when you are not able to do any of these things, when you have a problem with your family, you are stressful, you don't know how to handle certain things within your family, because of which there is a lot of negative feelings that is getting created, or with your friends, when you talk about a relationship, right? Any relationship, or from a work perspective, you are not able to focus on things, and there is some kind of emotions, fear, or guilt, or sadness, something that is actually preventing you from achieving your maximum efficiency. So all these things makes it. That's basically, you are not able to do your day-to-day task. You find it very difficult to do your day-to-day task. So which means there is something that's bothering you. That is a time when you actually seek the help of a counselor.
Okay. Lovely. So any symptoms or anything that the people have to watch out, Kannan, to identify, or how can friends or colleagues or relatives identify uh, pointers where they know that this person requires counseling?
Yeah. Yes, there are pointers. Okay. But apart from these pointers also, we might miss out certain things, but these are the major ones. Okay. See, you will see that, okay, when a person normally who interacts very well, suddenly the person is withdrawn. So he doesn't actually communicate to her friends or family, just he keeps himself alone. So, which means actually there could be something that's bothering his mind, which is actually preventing that. So that could be one symptom where that can find out what is actually bothering him, and then probably ask that person to seek the help of a counselor. And some of these things are very obvious. We will actually see that a person, whenever he comes to work or whatever time it is, he doesn't gets dressed up properly, he doesn't comb his hair, just like that. Okay, you don't see that. Suddenly you see something happening, that which means these are some symptoms that the person can be depressed. So then you have to start connecting with the person and ask more details about what he is going through, which can actually help in he opening up and talking about his or her problems. And not only that, the other symptoms are basically, I mean, there are something like, okay, so when somebody very close, a person who is actually close to the client passes away, so that can actually produce a lot of grief in that person. And similarly, something which is very valuable to that person or something very important to that person, even job loss, right? So these are things which can actually create grief in that person. So at that time, it is better to seek the help of a counselor. And other than that, if the person has some kind of phobias or some kind of a lot of anxiety, see, I mean, everybody goes through anxiety some point of time, but when the anxiety level prevents them from doing an activity which is required for him for the survival, then the person can actually seek the help of a counselor.
Lovely, lovely. So are there any quick self-assessment tools that one can log in and take anywhere to understand if they are going through or if they need counseling?
Yeah, it just ties up with the last question, where you think that there's some activity which you are not able to do properly because of all your negative thoughts or emotions or those things prevents, then that is a symptom that, okay, they have to seek help. That is one thing. The other aspect is whenever there is a sudden change in the
Are there
sleep activity.
online tools? Are there any online tools where I can log in and assess myself?
Yes, online tools are there. Online tools are there. See, for instance, if somebody wants to check if they have a depression, there is an depression inventory available, or rather, there are lot of depression inventory lists that are available. And similarly, anxiety is there. Even for assertiveness, also they can actually go and check. These tools are all available. Okay, but whenever we are talking about a depression or anxiety, it is better they seek the help of a counselor and then go through these tools, because the risk here is that, okay, some of the questions that are there in these checklists or in this assessment, these questions can trigger some negative feeling to them. So it is better to talk to the counselor and make the counselor do the assessment for them, because if they do it in front of the counselor, then at any point of time, we know the counselor can actually look at what are the changes that is happening, okay, and they can actually help in understanding certain things and ensure that they don't get into that negative feelings.
Lovely,
And that way it will help.
I think this is like going to a doctor, Googling
Yeah, exactly.
about a disease and then going to a doctor, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of things can be compared with that. Yeah.
Lovely, lovely. Okay. So another thing in India specifically, okay, seeking help, going to a counselor is still a taboo here. Whereas in progressive nations, you talk to every other person, they don't hesitate going to a counselor or seek help. So how can we overcome this in India? And in your perspective, how has this been? Is my assumption right? Or are people opening up in India?
Yeah, it is right, because see, I have actually got this input from the clients who come to me, especially in a corporate setup, right? So people who are actually worried when they come to me saying that, I don't know, I spoke to my friends, but they said that, no, going to the counselor may not, I mean, they may actually think something that, okay, you have a major problem or something like that. Okay. But again, it depends actually, because there are certain people who are actually very encouraging for their friends to go and seek support somewhere which can actually help them. Okay. But still there is a taboo. I mean, personally, from my experience, when I started counseling in TCS, at the beginning, I mean, for first 4 or 5 sessions, I did not get anybody. Okay. So one of the things that I did there was along with HR, we walked into each of the ODCs. There's a complication, right? Because you can't get all of them together because they are in different ODCs. So went into different various ODCs and then gave a 7 to 10 minutes talk about counseling awareness and what are the things that they can actually use counselors' help for. So that really helped, because after that I started seeing more employees walking in for counseling. So generally it's an awareness, and adding to that, most the employees who come for counseling are actually ladies. The percentage of male population who come for counseling seems to be minimal, because I think probably I feel that is the next level of taboo, where we always feel that male population, they are always strong, they will never they will never cry, so they should not seek help, otherwise people will think that they are weak. So those things could also be a part of that. So it's more and more awareness is what that we have to do to create that, because it's just like, as you said, like doctors, going to a doctor, right? If you have a problem, you go to a doctor. We have a common cold, you go to a doctor. And even if you have a very terminal illness like cancer, you go to a doctor. So similarly here also, it ranges from smaller things to major disorders. So you go to the counselor, even if you have some kind of stress or depression. Not the kind of mild depression, okay. But then when you actually start analyzing, there could be some symptoms which can actually lead to that, okay, there could be some kind of disorders or something major. And then appropriately, the counselor will refer them to a psychiatrist for further treatment, for medicines and all. But it doesn't mean that all of them require medicines. So in fact, most of them don't require medicines. The counseling or therapy will actually help. So that awareness has to be brought in, that's all.
Yeah, I think you made a wonderful point in terms of the gender perspective on women approaching this in a more easier manner. What are the issues why you think that women approach more in your experience?
Women approach more.
Right.
Yes. See, the major types of issues that I have seen, see, one is where they are actually depressed because of problems. Relationship issues are there, okay. And grief, as I said, no, loss of people because of which they get into grief. And in some cases, what happens is, it starts with this grief or some kind of a depression, okay. Once that they overcome that, then they still wants to continue with the counseling session, because they want to see how they can actually develop themselves. It's more of a personality development, because they feel that, okay, I'm actually getting upset with a lot of things, I'm getting angry in this area, with this, I don't know how to handle the situation, what can be done here. So they actually go into those things. For instance, assertiveness also comes in that place. Actually, they are not assertive enough to handle certain situations. So then the counseling session goes into a kind of a psychoeducation about some of these areas. And the other one is marital, especially at home, family issues. So how do they overcome? How do they handle certain things? So these are the areas where I have seen more of women folks coming.
Okay. So not much in your experience on the work-life balance or the work-related stress.
Okay, when I said depression, right? So the depression was also something related to the office environment. And what I have seen is, one thing I have seen is that anything related to this work environment pressure, with certain number of sessions, they are able to cope up with that stress. So the longer sessions are required for their family related things. But for the work related aspects, I've seen that after a few sessions, they actually start handling things. Yeah. So they are able to, they get that kind of, they are empowered to handle those situations.
So in your experience, what are the benefits that corporates are experiencing because of this counseling sessions or the employee assistance program when an organization has a tie-up with an EAP? what are the benefits that an organization can actually reap?
Okay. See, one major thing that we are seeing now is, see, we've been talking about this absenteeism earlier, which actually, decreases the productivity of the organization. But there's one more called presenteeism. So when you talk about presenteeism, where people are actually present in office, but they are, they are not focusing on the work because of multiple reasons. Because either they have some kind of negative thoughts about certain things, and which actually spreads across to others also. So when they come for counseling, if that their issues are addressed, they become better, they become happier. Once they become happier, they do not spread those kind of negativism across the organization. That is one thing I have seen. And the other one is, handling some of these situations gives these employees more and more confidence. So even in an office environment, when we actually talk about they being there in presence of the client, okay, when these people, when these employees actually they become more assertive and they don't have those kind of anxiety, then they are able to manage the clients better. So these are some things personally the clients have indicated to me.
Lovely, lovely. Are there any laws in India related to counseling or related to psychology or treatment that's being given to the employees or to individuals?
Okay. See, there are no laws specifically for counseling as such. There are laws for mental health. Okay, so there is a Mental Health Act 2017. In fact, the original one started around 1987, if I remember right. Then now there has been a revision to that Mental Health Act 2017. And in fact, a few days before, I saw that there has been some revision to this Mental Health Act also. In fact, it was talking about getting reimbursement. Okay, so those aspects. So that is one thing. Other than that, there are a few other laws where counseling is embedded in that. It may not be specifically. For instance, the POCSO Act, Prevention of Children Abuse on Sexual Abuse on Children, right? So POCSO Act. So that is one thing where it actually talks about how to actually counsel children and how effective it is, those kind of things. And of course, the POSH, Prevention of Sexual Harassment, right? So that is there. And other than that, there is one called Rehabilitation Institute Act of 1992, I think. Okay, so that actually talks about the mental health rehabilitation also. So these are the laws that are related to the mental health that I could think about.
Any tips that you want to leave for our HR audience who are here with us on how they can choose a counselor? What are the evaluation criteria that they'll have to look for while choosing the counselors for their organization?
Okay, it's a slightly tricky one because because of the nature of counseling as such. Okay, there are multiple factors involved, and the main aspect of counseling is the confidentiality that has to be maintained. So the counselor will not share any of the details pertaining to those discussions that they had with the client with anybody else, because that's against the counseling ethics. Okay, so if you really want to look at whether how effective it is only that the employees can actually provide a feedback after going to counselor. I felt my issues are resolved. Then that could be a factor that can be taken into consideration. Okay. See, the other aspects are you can actually look at the experience of the counselor in handling the problems that are similar. For instance, if HR feels that, okay, there are a lot of depression related issues in the organization, okay, or something like that, any pattern that they see. And if a counselor has experience in doing those, handling those kinds of cases, it is better to go to that counselor, because there is a lot of already the counselor would have actually seen a lot of cases like that. So it is easy to identify and then provide the interventions to the client. other than that, see, the only thing is, see, as long, see, again, there is one thing that is inbuilt in counseling itself, because as a counselor, if, as a part of the counseling ethics, if a counselor feels that there is a case that he or she is not able to handle or make any kind of, or develop any kind of rapport with the client, and things are not progressing after a few sessions, see, the counselor themselves will say that, okay, things are not working out because we are not able to find any kind of rapport and things are not improving further. So it's better if you can actually go and see another counselor. Or there could be some kind of therapies which could be best suited for that client, which this counselor may not have, the other counselor may have. So it's better to refer the client to the other counselor. So that's part of the ethics itself. So see, that kind of, I mean, as long as a counselor actually following the counseling ethics, this thing is, taken care automatically.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I think you brought in a very valid point also, that as part of the ethics, the confidentiality is completely maintained. I think this is something that the employees want to know, and that will probably help them approach the counselors. There's a lot of fear is there. Hey, how do I discuss this? Will my HR get to know? Will my manager get to know about this? Right? Because they're not able to focus on work. Right? And when they approach the counselor saying that, hey, I'm not able to, so it shows that they are their performance is reducing, and they don't want their HR to know about this. I think that really helps. Confidentiality is something, and I think organizations have to promote that and create more awareness and sensitization within their organization on this. Lovely, lovely, Kannan. Great insights. So what I'll do is I'll move on to Dr. Dungarwala now, and I'll come back to you for the last Q&A at the end of the session. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
Yes, Doctor.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, so let me quickly share my uh, presentation so that I can quickly do a round of introduction for you. Aarti, in the meanwhile, can you also provide sharing access to Doctor?
Yes, Vijay.
Yes. So Dr. Kutusa Dungarwala, she is a specialist in child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry. She can be reached on drdungarwala@gmail.com. Thank you so much for being here with us, Doctor.
Okay.
Dr. Dungarwala currently heads the psychiatry at Surya Hospital in Santa Cruz, Mumbai, and is also a consulting psychiatrist at SRCC Children's Hospital at Haji Ali. She also has a private practice in Oshiwara, Andheri. In US, the doctor has just come back from US and set her practice over here. She had spent majority of her career in US, and she was very much familiar with the employee assistance program, where she has set it up in US in the Bay Area. And she specializes in treating children, adolescents, and adults in anxiety, ADHD, mood disorders, disruptive behavior disorders, autistic spectrum disorders, adjustment disorders involving divorce and loss of loved ones. So over to you, Doctor. I understand that you want to share your presentation, and welcome to our show once again.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you so much. And thank you, Kannan. It was a very helpful and good presentation. So I prepared a few slides to help all of us through this. So I'll just open my PowerPoint. And I'll share my screen with everybody. Okay. Give me 1 second, okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes. If you can, yeah, slideshow mode.
Great. Okay. So I just gave a topic to this. There's just a few slides. It's not a very long PowerPoint, but I think it covers some of the questions that VG had for me in the beginning. So anyways, so the next slide is a little bit about myself. And I'm a child, like VG introduced me, I'm a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist. I'm currently practicing at Surya Hospitals and at SRCC, and I have my own private practice. So a little bit about myself. I finished my MBBS at Sion Hospital in Mumbai. And then I always wanted to be a psychiatrist. I took my exams and I went to the US and I did my residency in Texas. And then I got interested in child and adolescent psychiatry. So I pursued that for 2 years at Stanford. And I had my own private practice for more than 16 years. And in that private practice, I was working in an inpatient hospital. I was working, and that's where I had access to the AP program. I was in a juvenile hall for young, offenders in county mental health clinics in the US. So I've recently moved back to India to pursue professional goals here. So just to give an overview of the difference between, I know Kannan explained what counseling is and what psychologists do, but I think some of you may have had the question that what is the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. So the main difference is that psychiatrists are medical doctors and they go to medical school, and basically what we have like 5 years of our MBBS training if you're in India, and then we follow and do a fellowship residency for about 4 years, and then another couple of years of a fellowship if you want to pursue a super specialization. And we look at the biology and the neurochemistry that that basically influences us human beings' behavior and emotions. And that's how we sort of gather information and see how we can best help our patients, with medications or not. And typically the care of a patient is, it should be collaborated between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. So what I mean by that is that if a patient is being seen by a psychologist and the psychiatrist is in charge of the medicines, for instance, the information that the patient is giving in detail to the psychologist should be conveyed to the psychiatrist to make better treatment options for the patients, that's what I mean by collaboration. So then, it takes us to the next point of like, what are the psychiatric illnesses that we commonly see in a work environment, like yourself in the big corporations, and how would they present, So I prepared a few slides on that. So the most common one was depression and mood disturbances, So how does that commonly present? Like you could see, an employee, seeming generally irritable, being very nervous, being withdrawn, having general body aches and pain, having insomnia, which can lead to poor decision-making, impaired judgment, having angry outbursts at work. So all of these could contribute to a mood disorder. And a survey that I looked at, said that 6% of there's a lot of disturbance, right, Vijay?
Just a minute.
6% of the workplace population reports depression. Thank you. The next one is anxiety. So how does anxiety generally present in the workplace? So you might have an employee that has to be continuously reassured about their performance. They keep worrying about themselves. They may have, like frequent headaches with no particular known cause. They may also suffer from insomnia. They can have a high blood pressure. They can have changes in weight due to overeating or not eating enough. And in my practice here in India back again, I've noticed that anxiety disorders most commonly they will present with gastrointestinal symptoms, and sleep disturbances or heart trouble. And so it's not surprising that anxiety disorders will lead to loss of work, similar to major depression. The next one is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is considered to be an illness of children, but actually it's not just an illness of children. A large amount of adults are affected by it. So, how does an adult that has ADHD, how do they present in the work environment? So if you would see an adult who's at work, who's struggling with organization, is not able to keep deadlines, is not able to manage the workloads, is unable to follow directions from the boss, gets into conflict with the peers, those would be like warning signs to an HR person or to a manager that, you know, this person might be needing a little more support, you know, in terms of mental health. So the statistics show that ADHD, the people that suffer from ADHD, they lose about 22 days of work every year. And they're 18 times more likely to be disciplined for bad behavior and 2 to 4 times more likely to be terminated from their jobs. And substance abuse disorders, you know, these are again extremely common things that we come across in our practice. So, you know, people that by substance abuse we mean using drugs or alcohol generally to cope, you know, with difficult feelings or difficult situations, and excessive use of these for insomnia, to help with anxiety. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, you know, in a little later. The next one is, you know, the illnesses that we commonly see are psychotic disorders. Like, you know, we could see somebody who has schizophrenia or has delusions, you know, like it could be a person that is working and think that, oh, my peer next to me is trying to get me out of this job and is trying to put me down. Now, this is just a delusion that they have, a false belief, and how that can impact their work, you know, because they firmly believe that it is true without having any evidence. And I'll talk about a case that I had, you know, at the employee assistance program. Eating disorders is another common thing that we see. And there are mainly 3 types, which is anorexia, where it's restrictive and intake and calorie counting; bulimia, where people eat large quantities but they throw up; and binge eating, where people are eating large quantities of food uncontrollably and with a feeling of guilt, and it happens periodically. So this is all related to their emotions, you know. So the next question comes up about the prevalence of mental illness, you know. So I was looking at this, a study that was done by NIMHANS, and it was done in the year 2015-16. And it was a very extensive study that covered the whole of India, basically. You know, it was all over India in various states. And what the statistics showed that the incidence of mental health disorders is about 10.6%, you know, and then they've divided it into different sort of illnesses. Like you could see the substance abuse is pretty high. The next is the mood disorders, and then you have the anxiety disorders, and then, you know, the psychotic illnesses. So that tells us that, and then the other statistics pointed that at least 20% of the people that come into a general practitioner's office, a primary care person, they have some sort of mental illness, you know, they're struggling with. So what are the age groups that are affected? You know, that's the next question. Like, is it, you know, the young age group, or the most affected age group is actually from 30 to 49 years old. And that is the most productive age group. So we can see that that's where, you know, the earning potential, the quality of life of an individual can get very affected if we don't address the mental health issues. Excuse me for a second. Okay. Then Kannan talked a little bit about this, but I just will elaborate a little more on the gender differences, you know, of mental illness. So as we can see that the total amount of illnesses is higher in the male population compared to the females. And particularly if you look at the substance abuse, which is the alcohol use disorder, is extremely high in men rather than women. But the mood disorders and the anxiety disorders, which they've called as neuroses, those are high in women, you know. So that's a big gap in the gender, you know, how it presents in the genders, male and female. So I think that's my presentation. Now I'll open it up to VG to ask me the questions that she had.
Lovely. That was an insightful presentation, Doctor. I think as you were walking us through on some of the points, something like delusion or hallucinations, right?
Uh-huh.
So I also specialize on prevention of sexual harassment. So I deal with patients or employees who come with complaints where they seem to be hallucinating, right? So how do HR folks, when they can clearly see that this is not happening, but someone is coming and saying that, hey, I'm being harassed, someone is staring at me. How can
that is a very, very common complaint. So I can tell you about my experience when I was working in the US and on the employee assistance program there. So it was in the hospital, in quite a big hospital in the Bay Area in San Mateo County. It was a private hospital, non-profit. However, they covered all the nurses, emergency room technicians, radiology technicians, and doctors also. So in this group of people, I had one nurse who was my patient. And she was an ICU nurse. She was originally from Nicaragua. She had immigrated to the United States, and she was excellent, very hardworking, and she had reached the top, and she had become a charge nurse. But in her mind, she was feeling that the other nurses are actually plotting against her so that she loses her job and her position. So it took her a long time to actually come to terms and to, trust me and believe me. And she didn't have a counselor. She wouldn't go to see anybody. She would only see me. So in that case, I had to do both. I had to do the therapy as well as the medications. Now, introducing the concept of medications, was a very big, we were talking about stigma, right? So in this case, the stigma was so high because she was again from an immigrant population, and she was very averse to even coming to see a psychiatrist. And here the psychiatrist has to tell her that, look, you're just, imagining this. So it took a very long time. And plus she was an ICU nurse. So she was jeopardizing the health of other patients, because of her firm belief that these other nurses are plotting against her. So finally, we had to work as a team, like her, and it has to be confidential again. We spoke about that. So her peers, they shouldn't know that she's going through this. So we had to collaborate in a very, gentle sort of way, where we had to tell her that, you need to take some time off to get better for your children's sake. And she had 2 young kids. Finally, she realized, she took some time off, she took medications, and she got a lot better. So you're right. It's a very difficult thing to, the main thing is the alliance and the trust. The patient has to trust that this person is working in my favor.
Right. So, what are some of the myths associated with this? General mindset is that, at least when the HR know that this person is hallucinating, the immediate thought is, hey, should we retain this person in the organization, or should we let go of the person? Right? So, what is your advice to the HR folks? Is this something that's curable? And it's also something, it's also something that we cannot force a patient to go and see a psychiatrist, right? It's a voluntary thing. What would your advice to the HR for that?
So my general advice to HR and I think before it goes to HR, it is noticed by the managers, right?
Right.
So I was at a recent wellness conference with Lawson and Toubro a few months ago before the lockdown. They had a wellness talk, and I was talking about this work-life balance. So I was trying to explain to them that the managers are the people who are actually the forefront, in the forefront. So if they notice something, it is their responsibility to very gently try and understand that this person is struggling with something, so instead of sort of stigmatizing them or judging them or sort of putting even more pressure on them that, look, you're not meeting the performance review, it's important to be empathic and try to understand their perspective, like where they're coming from, and a lot of times there is a reason behind this. There is some story. So like this nurse, she actually had suffered severe trauma in Nicaragua, where she had seen people being killed in front of her, and that trauma was affecting her in her work here, which came to the forefront after many years. That's where the psychosis started from. So there is a reason for it, and if you treat it in an effective way, the person can get better. They can live a very good, productive life. So you have to give a chance to the person, is what I'm saying. And if they're open to treatment, then you have to allow that, right?
Right. Lovely. So, what are your tips for people during this pandemic, the stress that people are going through because of the lockdown and not able to go or working from home and not able to meet their colleagues? What is your tip, doctor, to employees?
So I am seeing that because of the pandemic, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? For all of us, not just people who are working in corporations, but all of us are uncertain of what's going to happen next, right? And some of us are with our older parents and with young children, and we are always on this worry that if we step out, we're going to make things worse for people that we love. So I think this uncertainty gets to people and makes them anxious, And at the same time, some people are not in very healthy relationships to start with. So when they're caught up together like this, the domestic violence can increase, the relationship problems can increase. And for teenagers, it's even harder because they're so used to having such a good social life, and they have to be cooped up, with their parents or their other sibling who they may not get along with. So all of this can add to the stress, anxiety, and depression, you know. So my tips would be to try to maintain a sort of a routine, you know, in this unstructured environment. When you do that, it gives you a sense of normalcy, you know. In this abnormal environment, it gives you a sense that I have some control on some of the things, right? It's mainly about losing a full control as human beings, like we don't know what's going to happen next. So if we can maintain a sort of a routine for each one of us, you know, and do some of the things that we really enjoy doing, you know, and of course, if things get unbearable, like if there is this, you know, domestic violence issues and things like that, then they have to be reported, you know. That would be my advice in general.
Lovely, lovely. So I'll move on to the question and answer session which our audience had. So they had posted it as part of their registration itself. So I'll move on to that.
Yeah.
Let me share my screen also for that. So any other Q&A that the audience have, please use the chat window to please post it over there, and then we will answer them. So some of the questions that we've had from the audience. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. How to keep employees engaged and stress-free? How to boost the employee morale during this lockdown?
Okay. Can I take this?
Yes,
sure,
please.
go ahead.
Okay. See, one thing, I know we have been actually talking about, okay, been too much of stress during this lockdown situation, a lot of negative things, but I think there is also some kind of a positive aspects also that are happening during this period. See, one thing is, okay, they are actually working extra hours, okay, but the only thing, the plus point is that, see, almost 4 hours of travel that has been actually cut off now. They get those 4 hours, so how they can actually utilize, if they spend even extra 2 hours on work, so the other 2 hours, how they can actually engage themselves. So the best thing is whatever they are interested, some kind of passion that they can do within indoors, what they can do, they can actually do that. And the other one is, the simple thing is, if they can actually follow some kind of a regular exercise, simple breathing exercise or muscle relaxation exercises, that should actually help them out. And this is the best time for them to look at how they can actually develop themselves. Questioning is one, okay, yes, all these things are there, how do I actually handle this? But have they actually looked at, okay, is this an opportunity for me to do something where I can develop something during this time? So what they have done. So keep engaged, as Dr. Dungarwala was pointing out. So a routine where they can actually help, which can actually help them in developing themselves. Along with this relaxation exercises and breathing exercise, that should really help.
So one other thing, maybe, can I add to that, Kanan?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure,
So
please.
I was just thinking about it as you were speaking, is that, you know, sometimes when people are working from home, like for some people it works very well, you know, they're just really happy to be at home and they can take breaks as much as they want. They can go to the fridge, grab something to eat, come back, you know, go outside and smoke, and they can't do all that at office, right? So working from home works very well for them. But there are some who like the social interaction, you know, and they feel very isolated. They miss their friends at work. So maybe if companies can organize some Zoom sort of parties or something like games, you know, online games for employees, like have one evening, like on a Friday evening, you know, and a get together, you know, that kind of thing, and have an organized game or something like that where people can connect socially, you know, that might be something for HR to do, is what I was thinking.
And I think there was one interesting question by Subin Kurian. What are the key questions to ask in a counseling session for stress, depression related issues?
Okay, you're talking about what questions the counselor can ask the client to understand the depression?
The client can ask.
The client can ask. Okay,
yeah.
Okay. So see, okay, there are a few questions that they can ask. I mean, basically, if normally, if you look at it, when a client comes a depressed client comes and meets a counselor, okay, so if it is an extreme case, the client may not take that initiative of meeting a counselor. There should be someone who will be forcing that person to go and meet the counselor, or sometimes even somebody can accompany that person also, okay. So which means that person is under extreme depression where he is not able to do anything. He wants to do, I mean, we always think that, okay, he's not interested, but it's not that he is not interested. He wants to do, but he is so depressed that he is not able to do anything. So that is the extreme level of depression where it's better at that point of time to go to a psychiatrist because they could be in need of medicines at that time. But other than that, whenever they come, the questions are, see, I was able to do certain things, but now I'm not interested in doing some of those activities which I used to do earlier. So this is something the client might actually say that. So what is the reason for this? Which is because of the depression. When the client gets into a depression, some of those activities which were giving them a pleasure earlier, they are no more pleasurable. They don't want to do it now. So that happens. And then there are questions where the client might be asking, saying that, I sleep more now compared to what I used to do earlier. So I'm not able to get out of my bed. I want to get out and start doing things, but I'm not able to do that. There is a change in the pattern of my eating. My eating habit has changed. So these are things, and I mean, which actually generally are some kind of indicators for a depression. And that can also be like, okay, see, I'm feeling blank. I don't know why. I don't know. I'm not interested in anything. And I feel that no one loves me, or I feel alone. I feel lonely. I feel like harming myself, or I feel like why I'm living this life. So these are some things which comes to me. So why all these things are happening to me? That is how these things happen. Sometimes they will not talk about this. Once the counselor starts, after building a rapport, when the counselor actually starts probing more, some of these things might come, especially the self-harm and the suicidal thoughts. Unless there is a rapport that is established between a client and a counselor, these things may not surface. So these are some things where client can actually ask from my side, these are the changes that I'm seeing. Why is this happening? So then the counselor can actually start probing more about certain aspects of it and then figure out whether the person is depressed or not.
So Vijay, in the chat, there are a couple of specific questions.
Yes.
I think Astha has a question and Vandana has a question. Do you want to read the question aloud, or how do you want to do it?
So I will go with the question by Astha as to how to react when a male employee comes with harassment issues by other male. She has another question which says there's a disease called cutting. Why do people cut or self-harm themselves when no one is harming them?
So I can answer that for Astha. So cutting, it's not a disease per se, but it's more a terminology that is used on the internet, and it's very prevalent in teenagers, extensively. So, it sometimes also becomes like a copycat phenomenon where, they see one teenager cutting, so they'll do it too. They'll hear from their friend, oh, cutting is helping me, I'm going to do it. But generally the cutting is done when there are an emotional pain, So it's they're harming themselves, so they're trying to relieve the pain. And a lot of my patients, when they will do that, they will say, oh, the cutting is helping me to start feeling something. I was completely numb, but when I cut, I can see that I'm human, And also there is a scientific basis that when you do cut, there is a release of endorphins in the brain. So there is some amount of relief and anxiety, and that promotes people to do it more. It's like an addictive thing where you get some kind of gain in your brain, so you're doing it again, So that's what it is. And I hope that answers your question. How can it be prevented? She has another question, a follow-up question. I was, in one of the questions, this is, so prevention can happen for psychiatric illnesses. So one has to be very aware, of what is going on with the person that you are with. You can, the friends, the family, and the, the peers that you work with, they are like what Kannan was describing. When you see a person who's not up to their level of how they were functioning before, you see them slipping in different ways, and you reach out to them, you ask them in a very non-judgmental sort of way to explain themselves, like open the door, to show the concern. That's when people will start talking. That's the best way to prevent these things from happening, to create an awareness.
And we'll take the last question, I think, for the benefit of time, from Prakash and Vandana. We'll answer these two questions, and we'll wind up the session. So Vandana's question is, like in cases of addiction, the person in question has to take the initiative to come forward to seek help. Even in therapy or counseling, does the person have to take the first step? Will it work or not?
If not, yeah.
If not, yeah.
Do you want to answer that, Kannan, or?
Yeah, I will answer that. See, the first step is actually taken by the client when they actually come to the counselor itself. So that is their first step. So which means, because there are times where people force the client to come. If the client comes on their own, that is actually their first step itself. Okay. So then the counselor can actually understand what the issues are and provide interventions. Okay. But definitely the person has to take the client has to take steps, because otherwise what happens is then it is more of, okay, the counselor it's like, okay, the doctor gives a medicine, you don't take the pills, right? So it's just like that. Okay. So the counselor can provide interventions. The counselor can provide more of awareness, and based on that, some steps that has to be taken by the client. So if the client takes those steps, the improvement process is actually quicker. Otherwise, it takes a longer time. So definitely, yes, it is important that the client has to take the steps. Unless the extreme cases where they are not able to do anything, where they require some medicines to start the process. At that point of time, as doctor was pointing out, the medicines will be there. At the same time, it will be a coordinated effort between the psychologist and the psychiatrist, where the interventions will be provided by the psychologist and the medicines will be provided by the psychiatrist. And over the course of time, when the person improves, then slowly the medicines can be stopped, and then the therapy can continue till the person feels better.
So over to Prakash Vaidyanathan's question. As we are currently in the lockdown period, my question is that even employees, family are under stress and anxiety. If in case of such scenario, how can a person identify and also how to overcome such circumstances?
Okay. It starts like this. See, one person has some kind of a negative thoughts, okay, which goes into a loop. So then I see what happens. We call it as it's a circle. Okay, so I am circle where you start with negative thought and then it actually goes on into a cycle. Okay, and not only that, it spreads across others also, where others also starts getting negative. So if somebody starts spreading a positive aspect in that, then the negative thinking of others can actually reduce. Okay, and the whole thing is about like start observing all the positives that we can do. That is the best thing we can do now. Okay, and the relaxation or the breathing exercises, the whole family can do it. And please engage in some kind of family activities which will improve the family bonding. And there is a kind of more of a connect that happens across the family. So these are all positive things that can be done during this time.
So just to add to that, I think those are very good suggestions and ideas. But just to add to that, one point is that how to recognize that they're under stress and anxiety. So I think if there is, like what we were talking earlier, both Kannan and I talked about it, and I described in my slides too, that anxiety can present as a lot of body aches, pains, decreased interest in what you were doing, have a lot of GI complaints, angry outbursts, insomnia. Insomnia is really up on the rise, in this pandemic. That can be a symptomatology of anxiety itself, So those are the ways, sort of red flags to recognize that, okay, this is caused by anxiety. It's not really something else. So
Lovely. I think this is wonderful inputs and suggestions. And just to summarize, identify and support people, empathize, identify for the red flags, seek help if you notice that among your loved ones, your colleagues, or your employees. Watch out for each other. Uh, hold out a helping hand for them if people need support. And apart from that, spread positive thoughts. I think that's beautifully shared by Kannan. Engage in some group activities, which is very positive, so that you can take away the negative thoughts. I think that is a lovely thought to leave the session with. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Doctor, and thank you, Kannan,
Thank
so
you.
much for your
Thank you.
time. Really appreciate it. For any other questions from the audience, please do write to us. You can write to me, Viji at kelphr.com or info@kelphr.com. You may also reach out to Doctor or to Kannan as well.
Yes, please do. If any of you
Sure.
have any more questions, you can
Yeah.
email me. Yeah.
Yeah, please do. Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.